After releasing 2 expansions to their monster hit, Dune Imperium, Direwolf released the standalone sequel, Dune Imperium Uprising, a new version of the game thematically based on the second Dune movie, with reworked board spaces, all new leaders and cards, and new systems like sandworms, contracts, and spies. Bloodlines is the first expansion since Uprising came out, introducing Sardaukar commanders and adds techs, new leaders, new cards, and new contracts to the game. It's clearly designed primarily as an expansion for Uprising, but is also intended to be compatible with the original game. As someone who loves Dune Imperium but doesn't play Uprising, my question is, how good is Bloodlines really as an expansion for the original Dune Imperium, both on its own and mixed with Rise of Ix and Immortality? Is it worth getting, even though about a third of the cards and components are Uprising exclusive? In this video, I'll show you exactly how much of Bloodlines is compatible with original Dune Imperium, then I'll explain all the new stuff it adds to the game. After that, I'll tell you about my experiences so far playing the expansion with the base game, as well as combined with Rise of Ix and Immortality. I'll tell you what I think about all of it, what I like, and what I don't like. Finally, I'll talk about how I think it stacks up against the other expansions and hopefully help you decide if you think it's worth adding to your collection. So here's everything that comes with Bloodlines. 32 Imperium cards, not counting the pre-order promo, 18 Intrigues, 2 Conflicts, 18 techs and the Ixian embassy board, 9 leaders along with their various components, the Sardaukar commanders, and 14 of their skills. Once you take out all the stuff that only works with Uprising because it has something to do with worms, contracts, spies, or the battle icons, here's what you're left with. 20 Imperium cards, plus 1 if you have the pre-order promo, 12 Intrigue cards, the Ixian embassy board along with 12 techs, the Sardaukar commanders along with 12 of their skills, and 6 leaders. Actually, maybe 7. I think Fenring can work, and I'll talk about that later. Of those leaders' components, the only thing you can't use is 1 of the 10 navigation cards for Steersman Y'rkoon. Okay, so let's talk about how all of this new stuff works, and let's start with the Sardaukar commanders, which are a new type of troop. The Sardaukar commanders are the Emperor's elite military force, but he's willing to hire them out to those willing to pay for their services. In the box, you get plastic and wooden components for the Sardaukar commanders, and it's up to you to decide which ones you like and just leave the other ones in the box. Sardaukar commanders count as troops, so cards and effects that reference troops do work with them. And just like regular troops, they have 2 combat strength. What makes them special is the way they're recruited and the way they can give you bonuses during your reveal turn from their Sardaukar commander skills. At the start of the game, place a commander on Fold Space, Wealth, Conspire, High Council, Rally Troops, and if you're playing with 4 players, Hall of Oratory. When you send an agent to a space with a Sardaukar commander, you have the option of paying 2 Solari to acquire it, then immediately recruit it to your garrison. You also then acquire a Sardaukar commander's skill, so choose one from the 4 face-up tiles and then replace it with the next one from on top. If you acquire another Sardaukar commander later, you get to choose another skill, but note that you can't choose one that you already have. There's another Sardaukar commander that sits off the board. The only way you can acquire that one is with one of the Bloodlines Imperium cards. Here's how the skills work. When you reveal, if you have any Sardaukar commanders in the conflict, activate all of the bonuses from your Sardaukar commander skills. Note that having multiple Sardaukar commanders does not trigger the skills multiple times. So in this example, even if I had 2 or 3 commanders in the conflict, I'd still just get the 1 persuasion, 1 troop, and 2 swords. Now, what happens if you retreat your Sardaukar commanders? Well, if you do it after you've already triggered your reveal turn effects, then great, you keep them. You're not going to lose that persuasion or that troop. If you have the driven skill, you don't have to pay back the spice. And if you had the desperate skill and you trashed it for +3 swords, you keep those too. Confusingly, the other 2 sword skills work differently. They don't have that reveal turn text at the top, and the rules state that if your commanders are retreated out of the fight, you lose the swords from those ones. For example, Here, when I reveal, I have Sardaukar commanders in the conflict, so I trigger my skills. I get 1 spice from Driven, and I have 3 influence with the Emperor, so I get 2 swords from Loyal. I decide to trash my Desperate skill for another 3 swords. Now, let's say I reveal the Chani and decide to retreat my commanders. I don't have to give the spice back, I keep the 3 swords from Desperate, but now that I have no commanders in the conflict, I have to lose the swords from the Loyal ability. It's bizarre, but that's how it works, and I'll give you my thoughts on it a bit later. When the conflict's over, deployed Sardaukar commanders go to your supply just like normal troops. However, they can't be recruited like normal troops. The only way to get a Sardaukar commander back from your supply is this. On your turn, you can pay 2 Solari to recruit a commander from your supply to your garrison. You can do this once per agent or reveal turn. Of course, if you do it while visiting a combat space, it can lead to some big deployments. Now let's talk about techs. They were originally introduced in the first expansion for Dune Imperium, Rise of Ix. They cost spice to buy and provide various persistent or activated effects. Bloodlines comes with 12 new techs that you can use with original Dune Imperium. At the start of the game, shuffle the tech tiles and divide them into 3 face-down stacks on the Ixian embassy board, flipping the top tech of each stack face up. Whenever you send an agent to any Landsrad space, you can buy 1 tech. If you have your High Council seat, buying tech costs you 1 spice less. Bloodlines presents techs as an optional module, meaning you can still use the rest of the expansion without them if you want to. There are 2 Imperium cards, 2 Intrigue cards, and 1 leader that you take out if you're not using tech, and they're marked with an icon to make that easier. If you're combining Bloodlines with Rise of Ix, don't use the Ixian embassy board. Just shuffle all the tech tiles together and use the normal Ix rules for acquiring them. Command is a new mechanic that appears on some Imperium cards and techs. It triggers if you have 6 or more persuasion during your reveal turn. It can give you various bonuses. It's basically an incentive to get your High Council seat and collect high persuasion cards. Last but certainly not least, Bloodlines includes some very cool new leaders with imaginative new abilities. Peter de Vries gets his own personal deck of Intrigue cards, Esmar Tuek adds a new space onto the board, Steersman Y'rkoon plots a course before the game even starts, and Duncan Idaho can send himself into the conflict. Okay, so what do I think about all this stuff? Let's go through it. Sardaukar commanders. Having some on your side can definitely help you win conflicts, especially if you have 1 or 2 of the combat skills. Perhaps counterintuitively, they're at their most powerful once you've already used them and they're sitting in your supply. That's when you can get those big deployments by recruiting them with Solari when you visit a combat space. Partly because of this, I think Sardaukar commanders are stronger than Dreadnoughts from Rise of Ix. They're 2 combat strength instead of 3, but they get a boost from combat skills. You don't have to waste an agent to acquire one because you do it while visiting a space that does something else. Also, you can potentially use them to win conflict after conflict if you have the Solari to pay for it. Whereas a Dreadnought that wins a conflict has to spend a round controlling a board space before you can use it again. And of course, Dreadnoughts can't provide spice, persuasion, or troops the way the Sardaukar commanders can through their skills. It's this resource generation that really makes the Sardaukar commanders interesting to me. They're not just there to win conflicts. Collecting 2 or 3 commanders and just deploying 1 per conflict to trigger all the skills and maybe even pick up some 2nd or 3rd place conflict rewards can be a really fun and efficient way to fund your war effort. Acquiring commanders off the board is first come, first served. So if you want that commander, you better get it before somebody else does. It creates a kind of a race dynamic. But be careful about letting anybody get too many of them because that's when they get really strong. Of course, acquiring and recruiting Sardaukar commanders can get pretty expensive. So anything that provides Solari increases in value, and the Solari board spaces are in higher demand throughout the game. You might actually visit Sel Melange more than once. The Emperor spaces are definitely more of a focus. First of all, they're a one-stop shop for Sardaukar commanders. Conspire in particular becomes a much more interesting space. In one visit, you can get an Intrigue card, 2 troops, acquire a commander, and have enough Solari left over to re-recruit it later, or acquire a different commander from another space. Expect much more action at the top of the board in Bloodlines. I think the Sardaukar commanders are cool. That said, they do take up a lot of attention space in the game. It's more stuff everyone has to keep track of. Which commanders are still on the board? Who has some in their supply? Do they have the Solari to pay for them? What's going to happen during everyone's reveal turns? Also, okay, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. The fact that the Sardaukar commander's sword skills aren't consistent in the way they work with retreating is ridiculous. And it's going to be such a pain explaining this every time I teach the expansion. Okay, so if you retreat your commanders after you reveal, you keep the stuff from the skills. Okay, cool. But not the swords. You lose those if there aren't any commanders in the conflict. Oh, okay, well, I guess that makes sense, right? Like the commanders have to be in the conflict to use their swords. Right, exactly. Well, except these swords. From this skill, you keep the swords. Wait, what? Yeah, see, this one says on reveal. These ones don't say that. But according to the rules, isn't combat strength always set during the reveal turn anyway? Yeah, yep. But in the rules here, it says while you have... What were they thinking with this? Sure, if you dig into it, you can find some kind of game system, rules, logic to explain why they work differently, but it's such an unintuitive and inelegant design. It's the kind of thing people are going to be confused about at the table and then have to stop their game to go digging through the internet trying to find out how it works. And was it really worth it for this? Anyway, the commanders, while interesting, can suck up a lot of the oxygen in the game. And to be honest, I really don't think it makes the game better. So it's something that I'll enjoy playing with from time to time, but definitely not all the time. I suspect they feel like a more natural addition to the already combat-focused Uprising, interacting with or acting as a counterbalance to the sandworms from that game. Tech. One of the things I was most excited about when I first heard about Bloodlines was the ability to add text to the game without using the shipping track and dreadnoughts from Rise of Ix, as I'm not really the biggest fan of those systems. So how does it work out? Well, it can be cool, but it can also be a bit awkward. In base game, you often want to use early spice for Sel Melange to get Swordmaster. So spending spice on text usually felt like something I didn't want to do until I'd gotten that accomplished. On the other hand, being able to buy a tech anytime you visit a Landsrad space kind of makes up for it, as you'll have more natural opportunities to pick them up throughout the game as you visit High Council or Mentat, for example. There is a bit of a weird dynamic though, where I often felt like I should put off going to those spaces until I'd collected some spice so that I could buy a tech at the same time. It's a bit of a theme in Bloodlines, as the Sardaukar commanders kind of do the same thing. Do I make sure I have Solari before I go to a commander space so that I can pick one up? It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can create some interesting decisions about multi-step plans, but sometimes it also felt a bit stressful. Overall, I did enjoy the Ixian embassy board and the text in the base game, and it's something I'm looking forward to exploring more, but it's definitely not something I'd want in there all the time. Based on the games I've played so far, I'd say that text felt more natural in the context of Rise of Ix. With the shipping track replacing Sel Melange, you no longer have that feeling that buying text is in conflict with getting your Swordmaster. I liked mixing the Bloodlines and Rise of Ix text together. After playing Rise of Ix a lot in the past few months, I really appreciated the extra variety that the Bloodlines text added in. There are also some fun combo possibilities. Use Sonic Snoopers with Suspensor suits to deploy a bunch of troops when trading in your intrigues. Or how about getting Mnemic Film, Self-Destroying Messages, and the charismatic Sardaukar Commander skill. With your High Council seat, that's 5 extra persuasion during every reveal turn. My favorite tech in Bloodlines is Servo Receivers. Supercharging your signet ring so that it can go to any space on the board is just awesome. And the fact that buying the tech also triggers your ring ability is very interesting. It's a unique effect, and it means that buying this tech will do something different for each leader, which is something we haven't seen before and is really fun to think about. Another one I really like is Glow Globes. It gives you Paul's Prescience leader ability to see the top card of your deck, which I love. It feels bad though that if you're playing Paul, there's a tech in the game that just has a dead effect for you. This is an example of where you can tell that Bloodlines is an Uprising expansion first and an Imperium expansion second. I feel like they could have put something in the rules saying that Paul gets to look at the top 2 cards, but there's nothing there. Of course, you could always house rule it, but still. Another tech that gives me this feeling is Navigation Chamber. It costs 5 spice and gives you a 1 spice or Solari discount when visiting board spaces. I don't understand how this thing is ever going to be worth it. How many times can you visit Selective Breeding or Mentat for it to pay for itself? Sure, you get an influence when you buy it, and sometimes it'll be worth picking up just for that, but that's an effect you can get off techs that cost 2 spice. When I look at the Uprising board though, it starts to make a bit more sense with the way its spaces are set up. Many of the techs are analogs or remixes of Rise of Ix techs. They're not particularly revolutionary, but that doesn't mean I'm not happy to pick them up in a game. I have to say though that something feels missing with the Bloodlines techs. Where are the big exciting ones? The 7-coster Sardaukar High Command makes using commanders cheaper, which is nice, but it's mostly about the victory point. The 5-coster, as mentioned, seems pretty bad, and after that it's all 4-cost and below. Where are the high impact techs that feel like they change your game if you can get them? Where's the Shuttle Fleet or the Holtzman engine? Well, unfortunately, they're reserved for Uprising. Something I do appreciate is there are no endgame victory points or tiebreakers hiding in these techs. One of my criticisms of Rise of Ix is it can be a real hassle trying to keep track of how many victory points people actually have. Ilbon's at 7, oh, but he has spy satellites, so he's actually at 9. Armand's at 6, but does he have memo quarters? Oh, okay, so he's at 7. It's nice that that's not here, at least in the Imperium compatible techs. It makes for a cleaner game. Imperium cards. I like the Imperium cards in Bloodlines. The coolest one to me is Litany Against Fear. I love the creativity of this design. You can just put it into play at the start of your turn, draw a card, and pass. The point being to get a Bene Gesserit card into play without spending an agent or a card to do it, making it easier to trigger Bene Gesserit combos. Speaking of faction combos, all of the Imperium cards in Bloodlines have an Emperor, Guild, Bene Gesserit, or Freeman tag, which is nice for cards that care about that. I like the command mechanic and the way it encourages having a high council seat and getting high persuasion cards, even making Hall of Oratory sometimes worth going to when there isn't a big card to buy. I'm not going to do a card by card review in here, I'll just say I like them a lot and I'm happy to add them into the game. Intrigue cards. I always like having more variety in the Intrigue cards. Bloodlines adds some retreat effects, which synergize well with the Sardaukar commanders. I also really like the ones that let you acquire a tech for -1 spice, as that combos with the High Council discount from the Ixian embassy. About half of the Intrigue cards also give you a choice on how you want to use them, which I like. Now for what I think is easily the best part of Bloodlines, the leaders. The asymmetrical element that leaders add to Dune Imperium is part of what makes the game so amazing and replayable. Getting a bunch of new ones is super exciting, and I think Direwolf absolutely knocked it out of the park with these Bloodlines designs. I want to talk about them one by one. Okay, let's start with Esmar Tuek. So if anybody picks Esmar Tuek, then the 2x siege space gets added onto the board as an extra desert space. I really love this. If you're Tuek, it means you're going to be collecting a bunch of resources just here and there throughout the game. If you go to 2x siege, then you get a Solari. And if somebody else goes there, then you get an Intrigue card. So it's like this awesome dynamic where it's great for you to go, and it's also great if somebody else goes. The way that your signet ring works means that you're going to be getting spice, and it's so fun to just steal spice off the little stacks on the desert spaces. You can kind of control which ones are worth going to. You might see somebody saving up water to go to the Great Flat, and it's just like, yoink, it's not going to be as valuable for you. Also, if you go to 2x Siege with your signet ring, you can add a spice onto it and then just take it right away. Also, just having that extra desert space there changes the game in a couple of ways. So for one thing, it's an extra combat space people can go to. So it makes it a little bit easier for people to get involved in conflicts. Also, it kind of means spice is going to be more available. But on the other hand, if you're using your signet ring a lot, maybe not because you're taking it for yourself. Anyway, it just changes the dynamics in a way that I think is interesting. Duncan Idaho is such a genius design, thematically and mechanically. So Reducing the cost of Swordmaster is obviously great because it just makes it more likely you're going to get it fast. It enables the 3-move Swordmaster that a couple of other leaders already have, where you can go to Haga Basin, get 2 spice, go to Sel Melange, sell it for 6, and get Swordmaster 1, 2, 3. Beast can do that in the same sequence of moves because he starts with a spice. Memnon can sometimes do it with the Signet Ring, but it's something that Duncan Idaho can do quite reliably. Speaking of the Signet Rings though, man oh man, sending your agent into the conflict, I just love it thematically. I love the idea that Duncan himself is going into the fight, but it's also really interesting in a gameplay perspective because it means that you can get involved in conflicts that you otherwise wouldn't, right? Because you can send your agent from any space. You don't have to go to a combat space to do this. So for example, maybe you send your Signet Ring to Mentat. Well, you can just send that agent straight into the fight. Or maybe you're going to like a secure contract or something. You can get in on the fight. So what I found with Duncan is that you can collect some like 2nd and 3rd place rewards more often just by using that Signet Ring ability. And then when you do want to fight for something, well, it's extra power. So if you do send it to a combat space, let's say you go to Carthag, well, you get to throw in the troop from Carthag, maybe 2 troops from your garrison, and the agent, which might be worth 3 strength if you have your Swordmaster. Now keep in mind, if you do send your agent into the conflict, it's no longer on that space, which means it's available for other players to go to. I just found it super fun to use Duncan. I love the simplicity, the thematic consistency, and the fun of using him. Peter de Vries, can you believe he gets his own personal Intrigue deck? I love the madness of these designs, man. It's just so cool. His Intrigue deck is not as powerful as normal Intrigue cards on average. Of course, this is good in a couple of ways. First of all, it would be obviously overpowered if he was getting full strength, free Intrigue cards every round. But it also creates this interesting situation where a lot of the games I played with Peter, the Peter player had like 5 or 6 Intrigue cards in hand, but people weren't all that excited about going to secrets because they knew they were probably just stealing something that wasn't that big of a deal anyway. And so I found Peter often got away with having just like a million intrigues, which was pretty interesting. I like the way that his Signet Ring synergizes with his Intrigue cards. So at first glance, it's like, what is this thing where his Signet Ring gives him a troop, but you can't deploy that troop this turn? First of all, that was a bit confusing for people, but the idea is a lot of his Intrigue cards cost troops to activate. So it's like lose a troop to do something. And so the Signet Ring giving you a troop is basically giving you the fuel to trigger those twisted Intrigue cards. There is a weird corner case with Peter where he has an Intrigue card that lets you give an Intrigue card to somebody else. And depending on whether you give them a twisted Intrigue or a normal Intrigue, you get a bonus. But there's no way for the other players to verify that that is what actually happened. So it's based on the Peter player and the person receiving the card to both kind of confirm that that's what happened. And I could imagine weird corner cases where every once in a while, both players might be incentivized to lie about that, and there would be no way to verify it. I think it's a really corner case, and personally, I don't like playing with players who would ever cheat anyway, so it's not something that matters to me, but it's something that like I feel like could sometimes come up in certain play groups. Now, even though his intrigues aren't as powerful as regular ones for the most part, they are still cool and they give Peter extra utility. So having a card that adds like the desert, city, and Landsrat symbols to your card can be handy once in a while. Having a combat intrigue that adds +1 sword can sometimes make a difference, and it's really hilarious when it does. So I love this. Chani. I had fun playing Chani in the game that I had her. It was interesting to just kind of collect the resources throughout the game. A spice here and a water there can definitely be helpful, and it was fun to play with her wanting to use troops and retreat troops from the combat. It definitely worked well with the Sardaukar commanders, especially with the skill that gets you an extra troop during your reveal turn. It felt like those systems were working well together. I will say, I think Chani probably won't feel as good if you're not using the commanders or the rest of Bloodlines for that matter, because you won't have as much retreat going on and you won't have as much troop deployment going on either. Her Signet Ring, I think, is quite strong being able to pay 1 water to draw 2 cards is a better deal than Research Station. And if you actually go to Research Station with it, I mean, you could get some crazy stuff going on. In the game I played with her, I didn't actually really get to activate it all that much, and I still found her effective, but I think that ring is very cool. Keep in mind, if you use the ability to retreat from the Signet Ring, that doesn't work well with the commanders because you only get the commander bonuses if you have them deployed during your reveal turn. So if you retreat them before that, you're not going to get your bonuses. Steersman Y'rkoon. Okay, this is kind of like the weirdest new design. He doesn't have a signet ring. He doesn't start with any water. And before the game starts, you've got to shuffle up your little deck of navigation cards and choose where you want to put 4 of them. So one thing I will say right off the bat is this is not a good leader for somebody new to the game because they're not going to have the context to know what should go where. Also, for someone who has like analysis paralysis, this is going to be something you're going to have to wait for before the game can even start. That said, I think he's quite interesting. It's a fun little puzzle to try to plan your game before it starts. Which one do I want to trigger first? Some of them have certain bonuses depending on which slot they're in. You can get a victory point from one of them if it's in slot 1, or one of them gives you extra persuasion if it's in slot 4. The other thing that's cool is these things trigger whenever you reach 2 persuasion on a track. It works a little bit different than Tessia from Rise of Ix, for example. You could theoretically trigger it. You could go down and back up and trigger the next one, and one of your cards can actually let you do that. Drawing a card whenever you collect 3 spice is also cool. It kind of, comes up every once in a while. Certainly it's not going to be every round, but it is a nice bonus when it happens. As for the power level of this leader, I really couldn't say. In the games I played, there was a win, there was a loss. I think it's the kind of leader that's going to take a lot of games to kind of figure out how to best use. Kota Odax of Ix, try saying that 10 times fast, is another interesting leader. At the start of the game, you get to peek at the bottom tech tile of each stack and choose one to reserve for yourself face down in front of you. The other players won't know what it is, but you will. At any time during the game when you could buy a tech tile, you can buy that one for a 1 spice discount. I just think this is really fun. It's fun to have your own little private tech that you know about, and it's fun to get a discount on it. Of course, it's going to depend on the game. Some games you're going to get something that's like really exciting and you're really happy to see it. Other games you might find some that you're not so happy about, but I just think it's cool and it's fun, and the variance is part of what makes it interesting. The Signet Ring ability, first of all, you can just get a spice, which is great by itself. Memnon is fun for a reason. Getting spice is good. The other one, which lets you trash a tech to get an intrigue and draw a card, is interesting, but something that it's hard to know how often it's really going to happen. It's going to depend, obviously, on what kind of techs you can pick up. But, it can be pretty valuable if you've collected some text throughout the game and they've kind of maybe already done their job, or it's like a really crucial moment and you just need something else to happen. It can work. And I've seen some players trash like 2 or 3 texts that way. So I don't know about that part necessarily. I don't find that super exciting. What I find exciting is getting to reserve that tech tile for yourself at the start. Okay, let's talk about Count Hasimir Fenring. I was disappointed when I first saw that he was related to the spy mechanic and you wouldn't be able to use him outside of Uprising. But when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, wait a minute. Well, why not? So first of all, having that passive ability of getting a Solari anytime you trash a card, that seems interesting. Having the Signet Ring ability to trash a card in your play area also is interesting. And I thought, well, okay, maybe you can use him and you just don't have the spy thing, and maybe he's still worth using. And then I thought, why not let him have the spy thing? It's not a very complex thing to explain, to just say this one leader has the ability to put a spy on the Emperor spaces, and that means I can go there if somebody else is there, or I can draw a card if I go there normally. I don't see a reason why you couldn't do that if your play group is okay with it. So I did it. I did play Fenring in a game, and that's how I played him, and it worked totally fine. The spy mechanic, I don't know how it works out balance-wise long-term. I think it's probably weaker than it is in Uprising just because First of all, it's a deep cover spy. The advantage of that being that you can go somewhere even if somebody else already has a spy there. Well, no one's going to. Also, there are other effects in Uprising that trigger off of spies, and so you're not getting that benefit. I found myself just basically using it to trash cards and getting Solari, which worked out great, especially with the Sardaukar commanders. Now, the fact that you have to trash one of your cards in play does make it a challenge to get the best use out of it. You're not necessarily going to be able to trash everything you want whenever you want. Let's say you want to use diplomacy for your first agent and signet ring for your second. Are you really going to want to trash your diplomacy or your signet ring? Probably not. So it creates an interesting kind of dilemma sometimes where it's like, okay, ideally I'd want to use this card first, but I want to get the trash off. So maybe I'll try to find a way to use my Dune the Desert Planet for my first agent so that I can trash it with my second. It also, I think in some ways is better in base game than Uprising because of the existence of fold space. So you get the Solari anytime a card is trashed of yours. You don't have to do it with your signet ring. So whenever your Seek Allies trashes, you get a Solari. Whenever Power Play trashes, you get a Solari. And fold space also, which doesn't exist in Uprising. So as far as the balance of Fenring, I don't know. I don't think he's a problem, and I think he'd definitely be worth trying out and, you know, have fun with it. All right, so how does Bloodlines stack up against Rise of Ix or Immortality as an expansion for Imperium? Well, I'd have to say it doesn't quite match up. Rise of Ix was a big expansion for Dune Imperium, and it was perfectly designed to be added into that game. Immortality is smaller, but again, it was designed for Dune Imperium, and it fits in perfectly and adds a lot of really interesting stuff. Bloodlines, on the other hand, as I said, it is interesting, but it's kind of like 2/3 of an expansion for the price of a big expansion. So just in terms of value for money, it isn't there, and I think a lot of people are going to be turned off by that. Also, you can definitely tell that it wasn't totally designed for this version of the game. There are a lot of things that feel like they're going to fit or make more sense in Uprising, not to mention all the stuff you can only use in Uprising. So if you are a Dune Imperium fanatic like me, and if you like playing the game in different ways, then I still think Bloodlines is definitely worth getting. Look, I paid, you know, whatever it was for a pack of like 6 promo cards. That's not great value for money, but for me it's worth it because I love the game so much. I want all the extra variety I can get. If you're someone though who likes to have your one version of the game that's just ready to go and that's what you play all the time, I don't know if Bloodlines is going to be right for you. If that's how I played, I wouldn't add it in. It depends on what you like. If you like mixing and matching, if you like changing the game, if you like variety, I still recommend Bloodlines, especially for the leaders. The leaders alone, I think, make the whole thing worth it. I'm going to be happy to use them in lots of different versions of the game. Even if I'm not playing with the rest of Bloodlines, having those extra leaders available when I'm playing with base game or Rise of Ix or Immortality is awesome. So let me know what you think. Do you think you're going to add this into Imperium permanently or sometimes? Have you played it already? If so, let me know what you think. Do you like it? Do you think it fits? What's your favorite or least favorite part about it? Well, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was useful for you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for all the Dune Imperium stuff we've got going on here. You can watch me play the game live every Sunday morning on YouTube or Twitch. That's twitch.tv/bludgeon. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Bye.